But let's take a look at what do we do now and how do we organize and write and really think about what it is they're saying in an unbiased way, making sure we're representing the facts of the data as is. And so today we're going to talk about and remind ourselves that everything starts with your objectives. And we mentioned, there's only 5 steps to this whole process, and the most difficult is the smallest, but it's the first step, and that's making sure you understand what it is you're trying to understand, where the gap is in the research or what we don't already know and why we have to learn it. So here, again, one more time, it's going to all start with the objectives when we think about how we organize and write and present our findings. So with that, I'd like you to think about your objectives. And I would actually, very practically, I would do exactly what I'm talking about here as we're doing it. So I would pull out your objectives right now and have that Word document ready to go. And what I would do is have the Word document out with your instrument, and most of you again use SurveyMonkey, so with SurveyMonkey to match up one by one. Your first objective may have been understanding the profile of respondents. So I would take every question you asked that related to that. In this instance, there's 3. I took those 3 questions and I organized it there. And I know I'm going to use those 3 questions findings to answer that objective. Next one was about travel behavior, and I took 3 more questions that I happened to ask related to people's travel behavior. And again, you can see I asked a couple different series of questions related to importance performance analysis, right? And then the type of accommodation they used, I had 4 different questions that I asked related to that. So I take my entire instrument, I match it to my objectives one more time, and I may find a couple things. One is I asked a couple questions that don't really fit under my objectives, which tends to be a problem in research, right? All of a sudden you're trying to solve the problems of the world, not just the problems that I thought about. So in a couple of you, I worked with you, that happened, right? We had questions that didn't necessarily match our objectives. So this is where, again, we tweak to really determine, one, is it really an objective of the study, or was it a question I just asked because I had interest? And I may or may not present that in my final report. Or I may tweak my objectives at this point as well, because now I've really asked questions and maybe it was about what's happening in the world right now that we want to add another objective at this point. But the bottom line is we want to match and make sure that we're going to represent in our findings section the things we said initially we were here to study and to learn about. So we want to make sure we've covered our bases. And let's say we find now that we didn't ask a question related to one of the objectives and we've made a mistake. Well, that becomes a limitation of our study, that there were no questions asked about that objective specifically. And again, at this point, it doesn't matter. It is what it is. Our obligation as researchers is to ethically present the true story. And the true story is we didn't ask question related to an objective, and that's a limitation of the study. And if we had to do it over again, we would have asked a question or questions. So we have to be honest in our final report, and the limitations issue relates to a section of methodology, as you know from your worksheet. So know that, again, it's a story, and I think of research as being a storyteller. We're working through a process to learn about an issue or issues, and we're here to now tell them the story about what we found. And if we've made some mistakes or if it didn't go as planned, it is what it is again. So all we have to do is make sure we represent the true facts of what happened in this journey. So now we want to determine, once we've kind of matched those objectives and got ourselves organized to present the information, we want to really look at what the data says, and I'm looking for the story. I'm not going to present every single piece of data that is represented in our findings. I am going to tell the story of the data that's most important related to the objectives, and that really highlights the story. So it may be a 1 or 2 pieces of that whole question. I may have asked a question that had a 5-point scale, but I may only present 2 points of the scale because that tells enough of the story and I don't have to tell all 5. So I think of it as storytelling now, but factually storytelling, and not limiting the information or or eliminating the information or misrepresenting the findings because I'm not telling the true story. So, and then I also want to think about what do I want to say in written form and what do I want to represent visually, because the things I select visually are the most important parts of my story. And if my reader, right, was going to walk away from this study when I'm done, I already know that the visual elements they're going to remember, easy. They're going to look at them faster. They're going to potentially have more meaning to them because they're going to remember it. So I want to make sure I pick the most important parts of my story and represent those visually as well as in a narrative or written form. So to get all of that started again, let's take a look. First of all, we're going to organize everything by objectives, and I'm going to represent the data piece by objectives. And then, so simultaneously though, as I get that organized in my head, what I want to do is analyze the findings first in SurveyMonkey, and then in SPSS or higher level statistics if it's warranted. One of the neat things about SurveyMonkey is more and more they've added more analysis functions to it that allow us to look at data differently than even 5 years ago. It's really quite lovely. So, but there are opportunities that we have in SPSS that would allow us to analyze the data more scientifically or at a higher level to look at comparisons and relationships. And so I don't want you to think it should end in SurveyMonkey alone, but it certainly can begin in SurveyMonkey before we move on forward. So one of the things in the first step of the process, once we have data, so we've decided now to close off our collector. Time is always an enemy of researchers, right? But we also know in online surveys, if they haven't answered it within 7 days, it's, actually, I usually say 3 days. If it's not answered in 3 days, it's not going to be answered kind of system. So, but I'll give it 7 days. I'll make sure, I'm done collecting. It's doing what it's doing. There hasn't been any additions. So I'm going to shut my collector and now I'm ready to analyze it, analyze the data. One of my rules of thumb is I don't look at the analysis function on SurveyMonkey until I'm ready to analyze the data. I don't want to bias my view at all of what the findings are. So I'm going to wait until I'm ready to analyze. And so what you see in front of you here is actually the first step of the process, and it's called cleaning the data. And I've represented the SurveyMonkey survey in an Excel document, which I'll show you how to do, but I represented it this way here so I could easily show you why we have to clean data. So our first step of the process is I'm ready, I've shut my collector, I'm ready just to look at the however many people responded to the instrument, and I'm ready to start by cleaning and making sure I can analyze what's presented. And if you notice along the top row, you'd see the questions that were asked. If you can see my mouse, let me take it over. Like here you could tell it's an open-ended question, something what type, something about seasons, spring, spring, winter, fall. You can see another open-ended question. That's one of our problems here is I'm going to separate first quantitative data from qualitative data. So I'm going to analyze those in two different ways, so I can't have them in the same system if I'm going to use something like SPSS. That's for quantitative data. Even in the analysis function in SurveyMonkey, it does a really good job with quantitative data, and qualitative data does a few things, but I'm going to do that independently. So one of the first things I'm going to do is get those qualitative questions, and here this one is circled, right? I'm going to get them out of a quantitative study, and I'm going to clean data to do a couple steps. So if you notice here, it was an open-ended question about income or estimated income, and you can see some people indicated not a number, 80,000, 40,000, 90,000, and then doesn't apply. And you go down, there's a question mark. And you go down, and they've got a different set of words. Or you go down, they prefer not to answer. So a computer like SPSS or even Excel or any other analysis, it's not going to understand how to average NA or average plan activities or average prefer not to answer or a question mark. So I'm going to need to get those out of there, or renumber or word those in a way that a system can be analyzed in comparable things. So you can see here, this is age right here in the middle, and they're all listed in a numeric order that makes sense and they're clean, right? Like I'm going to be able to take an average of that instantly, but if someone had typed out 55, FIF, right, versus 55, then I would have to take the word and turn it into a number so it could be analyzed. Or if I said, prefer not to answer my age, right, it would be the same thing. I have to take out those words because a system isn't going to understand that. So cleaning the data is making sure that the information is what we consider bias-free, honest, answered correctly. Because if I had someone misenter their age as 555 because they typed a 5 3 times instead of twice here, then it would skew everything and my data would be faulty simply because someone's data entry error. So I want to make sure as I look at responses that those all make sense. People are between the ages of 30 roughly and 70 or 85, I see, right? So that would make sense based on the population that responded to my instrument. If someone had 2 on there, I would go, oh, I'm going to have to decide as the researcher what to do with that data. I'm cleaning it right now. And I would decide if someone had age 2 down, I would eliminate their age and I would look at the rest of the responses to see if they seem to be answered correctly and this was a data entry error, I may just remove their age. But if I get a sense that it was just someone messing around and I see 2s all the way down or I see something else, then I may elect to eliminate the whole respondent. And as the researcher, I get to decide that when I'm cleaning the data because I want the final cleaned data set to represent honest, bias-free responses, what I believe as a researcher to be the truth, right, based on the objectives or the questions that I had. So one is from a technical standpoint to remove or create the ability to analyze the data, but more importantly, and no, maybe equally as importantly, it's to make sure that the information is valuable because it's true. And it's as simple as that. So cleaning the data is a really important step in the process. And again, different collection methods require different type of cleaning because even if I had manually handed people a questionnaire and I entered this data in, we would want to go back and double check that I entered the data incorrectly because human error is very real and I would never want to be biased with it, but you can bet I may have entered a 55 instead of a 5 again. And made an error. So we would double check random instruments to make sure that my data entry was exactly what someone responded to on a questionnaire. So there are several steps we'd take, but with the methods that you use this semester, or the majority of you use this semester, we're going to take a look at how people entered their own information in to make sure it's clean, it's as truthful and honest and real as it can be. Or the best information we know. So just know that cleaning data, there's several steps. Again, we want to take out qualitative and quantitative, separate them out because we're going to analyze them differently. And it's simple in this case, cut and paste into a Word document if I wanted to from Excel. I'm going to make sure I move all the quantitative questions into one row, just meaning on this top row. If I'm going to use SPSS or another analysis technique, I'm going to need all of these questions in one row. So I have to condense them manually to get it to be an Excel document that has questions in one row, answers in the other row. Third thing is to clean findings with appropriate comparisons, making notes of exceptions. If I eliminate 2 of these respondents, I need to indicate that in my methodology, that 2 respondents were eliminated because their responses were questionable based on inconsistencies or based on exaggerated figures. And for example, their age was 555. So everything we do in a research study should be represented in our methodology of how the story unfolded. We sent the instrument out twice on these days. This is how many people responded, right? what happened. It turns out I didn't ask a question related to this objective, right? Turns out 2 people were eliminated because of their responses, etc. So all of those stories have to be told. And then 4 is to ensure accurate responding and eliminate outliers or questionable responses. I've had people on occasion answer that they made $555 billion as their income. And whether I question if it's reliable, I will indicate that would be an outlier, and that person so uniquely makes more money than everybody else in this instrument that I've elected to eliminate them out of the analysis, because it would obviously skew any mean income, any other kind of variable that I would use that $555 billion. So again, I'm the researcher. I get to decide. I just have to tell the story of what I've done and why I've done it. And then finally, again, keep track of all those changes to make sure in methods that we're going to tell that story. So with that, once we have clean data, then we're finally ready to analyze it. And one of the challenges is in SurveyMonkey, you have to do that within SurveyMonkey, and it's a little cumbersome. So I prefer to extract the data out of SurveyMonkey, put it into Excel, be able to analyze it in Excel easy that I've shown you here on the screen, and then I can put it back in and or I move it to SPSS, which is my typical. Now I can do that manually in SurveyMonkey, and I'm going to show you how to do that so we can do that while we're here. So once I have clean data and it's ready to go, I'm going to do a couple quick steps. And this is a picture of SurveyMonkey, but I'm going to show you on SurveyMonkey Live too. But one of the first things I'm going to do is simply print out the overall findings. I want to look at it as a complete set, every answer, qualitative and quantitative. I want to see that all done. And whoops, I should show you right here. So these overall findings, I'll simply go to Analyze Results. Again, 5 steps of the process. Here we go, right? Analyze Results. I click on the tab and I'm going to see question run at the top. I'm going to see the question and I'm going to see all the respondents. Responses, 542 respondents in this case. This was an open-ended question asking people where they've traveled last year for pleasure. So we get a sense of, in this case, it was a destinations study on people who visit that destination. And I'm going to print that out. So there's going to be a function that I can download that I want to show you here. But let's talk about different ways to look at the information as well. So I can look at the data overall, but SurveyMonkey also allows me to look at the data in a lot of different ways. And this first function on the left here, you'll notice it's called filtering. And filtering says, okay, you have this data set of information. Now, if you just want to look at one group for whatever reason, it may have been an objective or it may be a curiosity because you're looking for different parts of the story, SurveyMonkey allows you to eliminate another group of people. So one example that I've used here, and I've used this before, is let's say I use several different social media channels to gather data. And so I used 4 different collectors, emails, and maybe I used a web link, and you can see here this is what it was. There were a couple different collectors, 2 different email groups. Maybe one was to one database, one was to the other, and the web link went to some social sites. And SurveyMonkey will keep track of how many people have responded by collector. So you can see here I can filter the answers by collector, by questions I've asked, by people who completed it more or less, by when they completed it, right? I can look at different metadata. I can look at different variables. So it's really fun because I can look at this information a lot of different ways. And that's really when you get the richness of a story, potentially, when your data set in particular is large enough. A couple of you have quite large data sets already this semester, and you're not even done collecting yet. So you may want to filter responses by maybe some demographics, by age, by gender, by number of years they've worked in the industry, by type of hotel property. I mean, you name it, you could look at the data a lot of different ways. And filtering, though, again, gets rid of the rest of the respondents. So in this case, I wanted to look at just people who answered email invitation 5. One database of people. And you see here to the right, that's their response. But another way that I think is actually more common for me to use, except for filter and collectors, I use that one a lot, is to compare findings. Like I want to really see how one group of people answered compared to another group of people. So again, it's right next to filter, right in the middle here. It's called compare. You click on that button and you're going to see a lot of different ways. Again, I can compare by collector too, but I can also compare by question and answer just like I could with filter. So for example, I may say, how often have you visited Grand Haven or any community that I might do a research study for? And I always have an objective when I do studies about travel behavior to look at people who are first-time visitors and people who have been here more than once. But in this case, I just wanted to look at first-timers compared to long-timers, meaning people who have been here over 10 times. The data set was big enough that I had the ability to do that. So you can see the question I wanted to use was question 6. I then took question 6 and I looked at people who not live in the area. I want to know it's their first time visiting Grand Haven, and then people who've been frequent visitors to the area. And so what I did was just click on those 2 buttons, and then the next thing you see is SurveyMonkey is going to let me see every question based on looking at those 2 groups of people. So in this case, it was about how important was cleanliness, right, to your experience. And you can see those patterns look almost identical, meaning there's really no difference between a first-timer or a frequent visitor. They all put cleanliness as equally important, or at least the visual of this suggests that. So I like the compare function a lot, and so I don't, again, I'm looking for a story, so I want to see where it is. In this case, the story is people are the same, right? There's no difference between a first-timer and a frequent visitor. And that could be a story right there, the fact that there's no difference. There doesn't have to be a difference to have a story. And so I'm just looking for things that have meaning related to my study. So again, you're going to want to print these findings. You can analyze that in the computer all day long, but and I'm not trying to say waste paper at all. But to print the findings so you can sit down thoughtfully, make circles around things, find the things you want to star that might be more meaningful parts of the story, or start to organize how I'm going to write about all of this information, but in a smart way. I'm not just going to put it out question by question by question. I'm going to organize it by objective. And then even within that objective, I'm going to organize what needs a visual representation and what can be just narrative or what should be both. So in this case, on the left-hand side of your SurveyMonkey screen, you're going to see this arrow. And when you click on that arrow, it's going to show you an export all function. I want to show you a couple different things. So again, arrow, export all. And then what you're going to see under export all is all summary data, all response data, and then all individual responses. For the most part, I don't use all individual responses because I don't really care about what each human did. I care about collectively what they're representing. But I'll use both of these functions in different ways, and I want to show and tell you why. All summary data specifically is going to give me this screen. And what summary data is, it's taking all of the responses, putting it together in a nice little PDF here, similar to what I was just showing you. So I want it in a portrait form, but I can change that. This is the default, right? Letter style. But again, I could make that different if I wanted to, but I've left it. I'm going to start each question on a new page. That helps me when I manually figure out what parts of the story I want to use. And then this is the first time I've printed it, so I want all the open-ended responses. Now, if I have a big study and a lot of responses, this could get very lengthy. So I want to do this once because I may analyze my qualitative data right in those sheets. So I print it out once so I have one full report, but I may not need to do that again, even though I might print out some other things. So this is not a default check. I have to check the open-ended response box if I want it to print out. Again, I do it the first time, so I have a master document. And then I may or may not even use that document to analyze the qualitative findings. I would simply hit export, again, check those, hit export, and then I could print out all of the results of my clean data, right? The second thing is called all response data. And just earlier when I showed you the Excel spreadsheet look, that all response data is what I'd get here. So XLS is like an Excel document. I'm going to do it condensed, meaning one row for all the responses. And then the one big difference is it defaults to the actual answer text. But for those of us who want to use SPSS, I want a numerical value so I can put it into that stats program to analyze. So I typically will not do the actual text, like what it would say is, let's say gender. It would say female, neutral, male, right? Like it would actually have in that column of Excel, it would say that word. I want a value assigned to that. So if the first thing was male, that would be a 1, female would be 2, neutral would be 3. So everybody would just get a number 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, right? That way down. And then SPSS will be able to use that as analysis. So this numerical value right here, I check on that before I get my all response data if I want to move that into Excel. So these functions I use a lot. They're both important for different reasons. Help me clean data, help me use SPSS, and then also just analyze it through SurveyMonkey itself. So when I hit export, I'm going to get this screen. And you can see here I've got a PDF version and I've got an Excel version. So two different reports I've run. I'm going to click on that. It's going to show me in the right-hand part of my screen that it's done. I can click download on the bottom left. It's going to come up just like any other download would on your computer system. And again, you're going to see different data. So this is my Excel spreadsheet. This is the one I showed you before that now I can clean or use it in SPSS. And then this is the data analysis I can get right in SurveyMonkey. And for us this semester, again, you may use either. Your whole duty here as a researcher, right, is to find your story. So if your objective was to compare groups of people and do a higher level analysis, we're going to have to use SPSS. SurveyMonkey might not be enough. So it all depends what your objective is, depends what your story is, and it depends how you want to analyze your data. So analyzing your findings in SPSS will be a whole separate module because not all of you will want to or need to, and you've had that before in your stats class. So, but getting to that Excel spreadsheet, cleaning the data, and uploading that into SPSS is the way we'd go about it, and I'll do that in a separate function. Again, as I indicated, what we want to do is organize these findings by objective. So let me just highlight again how we want to do that. So you can see here, objective number 1 was an understanding of respondents. We want to use both a narrative and a visual format to tell our story. And I can't tell you that you have to do gender in a visual form because maybe it's not an important part of your story. Like maybe you didn't even ask the question, right? So I'm not the one to tell you what parts of your story have to be visually told, but you have to pick at least 5 things that you create a visual for to tell your story. Now 5 is a fictitious number because in a real research study you're going to do as many visual formats of your story that is important to tell, whatever the most important parts are. But everything has to be representative in a narrative form, but it might be solely represented in a narrative form and not in a visual form. For example, gender again. I may just say gender in written form. 50% of the respondents were male. And that might be the story I tell just in a sentence. So you can see that this student in particular organized it the way theoretically we suggest you do it, and that is by objective. It's clear where you've covered your bases. It's clear where you may have had a limitation. But it keeps your writing through 5 sections of this report very clear and clean, continuing to reinforce in every section what you intended to study, and now in this section, what you found as it relates to that objective. So as we do that, we want to talk about how we analyze quantitative data differently from qualitative data, and I want to kind of take you through that. In your function now, first we collected the data, then we cleaned the data, and then we kind of got it organized and set up, ready to go by objective, right? We also got it got it analyzed in SPSS or SurveyMonkey to look at some of the basic findings. And now we're going to walk through it step by step to see what information we actually want to use and how we use that in the final report. What I'd suggest to you is we've looked at several different journal article research studies, and we do want to say we'd like a more modern approach to writing, that you're not submitting to a journal article. You don't have to abide by their rules. What you are submitting to the industry per se, right? We want the industry to see a more modern reflection using all the steps of the process. You're still going to have an abstract. You're going to have an introduction. You're going to have a literature review, your problem statement, your findings, your methods, right? You're going to have all those sections, but you can do that in a visual form that's more interesting and appealing to the industry to read. So what I suggest to you, however, is even though this is not all that different than a journal article, right? What you're seeing in front of you, it's kind of like the first level. You may have a traditional looking table with information because you decide that's the best way to present the information. So there are a couple of things I want to kind of rules of thumb about writing a professional document, but research in particular, that I want to make sure you understand. So you can see here, there's a header. Again, that's not in a journal normally, but this could be the way you write your report. Again, you get to decide the format and the style. And we'll talk about that more next week when we talk about the formal report. We're just trying to develop this week the content in the middle, and then we can look at how it looks. Here is the research question in this case, right? And this is the story of the findings. So you can notice it's organized by paragraph because like content in like words. And then some of the data is presented here, and then some of the data is presented in the table. And if it's presented in the table as well, then you will see a reference to the table. So the rule of thumb is I would never take a table and throw it in a document by itself. I wouldn't expect a reader to make sense of all that. My job as the writer is to make sense of all that and present them in this highlighted form, important information. So I'm going to write about it narratively, and then I'm going to present to them an introduction of, this is also in Table 9 with some more information. So I'm going to word it as Table 9. I'm going to make sure I label this, because it's a table, as a table with a title. And then I'm going to give them the information, making sure I represent the N, how many people responded, making sure I represent, this is a percent, so this is 74%. This is an average age or a mean of 51 years, right? So I'm going to make sure I use appropriate labeling. And this is, again, this is a little more modern than a journal article would be, which would be APA style and would have different information. But the rule is I can't throw a table in a document without, I call it cushioning, right? So I'm going to have a narrative beforehand, but I'm also going to have a narrative after. So I may be introducing aspects of this research objective, right? Answering the question, what we know. I throw in a big part of the story right here because I want to profile that. And then I either add to the story here or kind of summarize what was found here. Because all in all, if this was one research objective, this should be able to stand alone. Now, there may have been more pages to this section, but this should hold its own. If it got ripped out of my report, someone could read that and go, whoa, that's the information on the people that responded. That's really interesting. It's well organized. It's appropriately labeled, right? Some rules of thumb about writing. If you start a sentence with a number, you have to spell the number out. I can't, I should have checked if I had that, but it's common. If there's a number under 10, you have to spell that out. That's a rule of writing. So again, you can twist some of those things, right? Because it's your chance to write in a more modern way so people will read it, understand it, and learn about it. But that's one example. Another example is if it's an image and you want to use a figure. So the big difference here is you're going to reference the figure in your text, and you're going to label the figure. But a figure, when it's labeled, goes below the image, not above. A table is above, a figure is below. So in this case, this should actually say figure 42, and it would match figure 42 here, and right, the title for it. So again, very different look than a journal article, a more modern look at how people most frequent responses of the type of visit by visitors. And most of them are there for a family outing, but 13% of them are for a friend experience, 22% for a couple's getaway, and 10% went for life, work, or another reason, right? But a very high volume of family types of experiences. So again, you can see the table, or in this case, the image is cushioned again with an introduction of it and then some more information about it below. So there's a lot of different ways to present information, and I want to invite you to do that in this research report or the findings section in particular. Again, you have to do 5 visual things to add to your narrative, and you need to address every objective you had in this research study. And, it might be different looks like this even. I would like to encourage you to do it a lot of different ways, and I'll show you different things you can do. It may be the way you present the information. This could be a large image that captures part of the story and not just a 10 to 12 point font, right? It blew it up more because this was an important part of the story to tell. So our students are more and more doing a really great job in showing how they tell the story and represent the data. See figure 1. I'll go to figure 1. It's labeled below. It's got a title, right? So they've told the story here. They're getting people to look here. And the same thing over here, right? They do it, and then see figure 8. And then figure 8, even though that label should be below and have a title, it's really close, right? And they're doing such a nice job. So several of these examples, again, are on Blackboard under past student research studies, but keep remembering the objective. And that's like, this is it. You've spent all this time getting to a point to tell a story that nobody else knows the answer to. Like, you've identified a gap in the research, right? Something that is missing, and you've decided to study that topic to help move our industry forward. So this is such an important part of the story, organizing it by objective, making sure you tell the complete story in both, again, a written and a visual form. So that's quantitative data. When we look at it, again, SurveyMonkey does a nice job just giving us the quantitative data as long as there's no errors in it, and I'll show you again how to do that. But qualitative data is analyzed differently, and we started out our semester analyzing some qualitative findings to do that. We're looking for what we call key themes or content areas that takes all of these words and makes sense of them for people to understand what the respondents have said. And for many research studies, even the ones that you've done this semester, you have a mixed approach where you have mostly quantitative questions, but you may have had some qualitative questions that need to be analyzed. So we want to talk about how do we represent qualitative data when you have 30 pages of people's typed in comments that you're trying to make sense of. So with that, you can see here to the left here may have been a question, an open-ended question that is similar to yours. How would you describe your experience in Grand Haven to others? And you can see people have answered, a few things here, but there are 329 people's responses. So how do I not just look at the first 10 and misrepresent the data? My obligation is to look at all 329 responses and make sense of that. So I'm going to do that a couple different ways. And I mentioned to you before, I can take this question and I can throw it into Excel. And that would be one way to clean the data. And then not only that, take those open-ended comments and take them out of there. But there is actually, and to do that, I'm going to use this question summary data if I didn't do it in that overall printing of the report. If I did the question summary data, I clicked on that and I said, hey, get me this question and throw it out of here so I can read it. It's going to give me a report like this. And the beauty is it's listed it by what we call a case number, right? Like this was the first person who responded to the instrument and they said that. Here's the second, they said this. Here's the third, they said this. So I've assigned a case number to each one automatically. And then they've said exactly what the person has said because they typed it in themselves. So I have the beauty of this really rich set of information from their own words, not my interpretation of their words. These are their words. So what I want to do is take 329 responses and see if they can be categorized into like themes, and I can represent 329 perspectives in an easier to understand format. So one of the ways SurveyMonkey, if you look at the bottom of my page right here that I've just entered, SurveyMonkey has a function that I can actually create tags. So right here to the right of every response, it says add tag. When I click on that button, I'm going to get this screen. And what we're trying to do is code like information into like groups. Now I can do that manually, or I can actually use SurveyMonkey to code them through the computer. So for example, I could check on the screen button. I could type the tag pleasurable or positive comments, right, about Grand Haven, and every time I get a pleasurable word or something like it, I would use the green tag. Green means go, means awesome, means, wonderful words. So you can see here the actual responses are incredibly positive, the bulk of them. So maybe I have a lot of green tags. So as I code each response, I say add tag, green, add tag, green, add tag, green. Meaning all of those comments are really positive descriptive words like wonderful, gorgeous, pleasurable, right? Like those are all super positive. So that's a neat function to keep it all in SurveyMonkey, and then I simply get a report afterwards. But I can also do that manually, and that's how we did it at the beginning of the semester, is to actually, again, every time I see positive words, pleasure, wonderful, gorgeous, awesome, I'm going to keep track of those positive words, but I'm going to put a 1 next to it every time. So I would take that 1 and I would put it here, and I'd put it here. Very pleasant and comfortable. Yeah, that's maybe not as strong, so maybe I'd have a new category there. Awesome, great, beautiful, gorgeous, great time, fun and relaxing. That's might be a different way to do it too. And then I go all the way down, I'm going to see, oh, person 26 said just okay. Well, that is clearly not super positive words. So I'm going to code that, and I get to decide as the researcher. But my key is, 1, being consistent. Every time I see a just okay kind of thing, I would need to label it that way. And every time I see positive things, I'm going to keep track of the words so I, maintain that integrity. But I can also use that at the end to explain what those positive words meant. So by the time I'm done coding, is what we call coding every person's response. 2 may have been overcrowded. Anybody who said overcrowded or related to crowds, I would, label there. Hotels hard to find. Someone actually said this up here, right? So hotels are hard to find. Anytime anybody said that, they'd get a 3. Anytime they were said okay or average, I would give them a 4. And anytime they said overrated, right, like a 5, I would give them a 5. So I would take all 326, is that what it was? 329 responses, and I would code every single one of them, potentially with more than one code, because they could have said fun but crowded, and I would want to represent both of those. But I would say that in my narrative that people had more than one word to describe it, and every word was counted. So maybe it's not just 329 responses. By the time I'm done, it might be 500 words to describe that region from 329 people. I hope that makes sense. So, more often than not, I manually code, so I make sure I represent. But the function here of tagging is really helpful. You can see there's only so many tags, and sometimes I'll have 20, 25 codes that I might put together later, but the first time through I put them into kind of their own category, and then I decide if I'm going to lump those 25 categories together at all, or I represent them as is. Qualitative data to check reliability would mean more than one of us would analyze the same findings. So if you remember in class, everybody looked at a different question, but they weren't. There were 5 other people in the class that were looking at the same question as you, and then we compared how everybody saw the findings, and we recognized not everybody was identical in their analysis of what people said. So there's a human factor concern, certainly, in the analysis of qualitative data because there's an interpretation function. The clearer we are on what the code is, the better we're going to be if more than one of us are coding, right? If I had said, here's the type of words that we want to make a 1 for, right, or put a 1, and then that would be easier for people than if I had just said positive words, because they might have thought positive was fun, and I'm going to put fun in a different category. So we have to establish the ground rules. We have to establish how we're going to analyze, and then independently analyzing and comparing, and if we have the same results, increases our reliability of the data. Meaning, whoa, 5 of us looked at this and 5 of us think the same themes exist. That's more reliable than if I had looked at the data by myself. So when you're adding your reliability and your validity things that you've done to make sure it's what it means and what it says, right? Then you'd want to indicate, if I have one other person look at this data, that added to the reliability of my analysis. Qualitative data, oh, there's a 4, sorry, average okay, so you can see how the code is there. So when I use the function within and adding tags here, you can see this code, green is now pleasure, right? Wonderful is now a blue tag. So anybody like that. So that's how it shows up in SurveyMonkey if you decide to use that way. And then all you need to do is hit a button and it'll show you the collective numbers for each tag. So again, it's a really helpful tool that SurveyMonkey now provides. The other analysis they'll do for qualitative data is a word cloud, and it means what it says, right? It gives you the words that are mentioned most are bigger in the cloud of words. And although they're interesting to look at, I haven't found them incredibly helpful because for this example alone, I'm going to put maybe 2 words together in the same category, and a word cloud isn't going to do that. So word cloud is interesting, but it tends not to be as scientific. It's just showing, again, what word happened to be used the most often. So again, this content analysis, it would be supportive in a narrative, again, in introduction. You'd label it as a figure, right? And very common in qualitative data at the bottom here is using actual quotes that represent the strongest themes. So for example, that data I just showed you, once it's analyzed, like 90% of the responses were positive in nature. In those 90%, these might be a couple quotes that represented that finding. 20% talked about the fun factor, right? 18% talked about the beauty, 14% talked about relaxing. Again, people could have more than one answer. So let's take a look at SurveyMonkey for a second and some of those functions I talked about and how to do different things. When I talked about cleaning data earlier, and I told you we could send it into Excel to do that and showed you a couple steps, we could also recode the respondents here. So let's say, for example, I see the NA, it's right here, right? It's the way someone responded. I could change that person's answers, and I want to be really careful here. It's probably one of the reasons I don't like doing this in SurveyMonkey. But I can pull that individual's answers and I can see what they've said and I can actually change their response. So again, as a researcher, I don't like doing it in here, but I would be doing the same thing if I did it in Excel. But for whatever reason, I guess, it just feels different to me. But it certainly can be done in SurveyMonkey, and you can see my computer is super slow right now. So hang on for a second as I get this pulled up so I can show you. But you simply click on the open-ended response that you'd want to modify because it's not going to be able to be analyzed easily. And here it comes. We're getting there. Patience, patience. Okay, I'm going to lose my patience here pretty soon. Huh? Okay, let me show you something else as I wait. Here's that word cloud that I mentioned. And you can see you click on the word cloud and it's going to take all the words. In this case, they're numbers, so it's really not going to make a lot of sense. But look at the numbers. There are a lot of people making 100,000, 150, right? The bigger the word, the number that it is. But again, not incredibly helpful. But here we get the list view. So the list view gives me an idea of what percentage of people said 100, etc. So again, what's nice about that is it quantifies, right? It gives me a sense of those together. But you can see the way people have worded it differently down here, it messes it up. So I've got to clean that up or I'm losing information in that case. So as let me just show you a couple things that we've already talked about today. And I use this big monster research study because there's just so many fun things in it. But let me go to the left here where you can see again, I'm under Analyze Results. I'm in Export right here. And again, that's when I want to print the study. I'm going to create a new export. A summary just does that PDF of the whole study. I'm going to print a whole thing. All response data is going to give me that Excel spreadsheet. Condensed. I don't want the real words. I want a numerical value. I'm going to hit export and it's thinking right here, and my luck today, it's going to take a long time to think. So I'm going to create another export because I want the whole summary of everything. I'm going to get a PDF here in a portrait letter. Each question is going to be on a new page. That's helpful when I analyze and I scribble what makes sense, what's a good question, right? And then I want open-ended to be in this one because it's my first one. I click export again. I can see download to my right screen is ready to go. I'm going to pull up that data. See, you're not the only ones who have computer problems when using Wi-Fi that's being accessed by the world, right? Or my internet. So as it's waiting, you can see this PDF is being created. And here we go. It's going to work. So you can see Excel. I double click. I can see the visitors here. Whoops, went on my other screens. Let me pull it over. And this is what I'm going to see initially, which is, whoa, a whole bunch of answers. That's great. This is all stuff I don't need to see because you don't need to see their email addresses either, right? So I'm going to first enable editing, and then this has nothing to do with my quantitative analysis, so I'm going to delete it. And when I mentioned before about getting the open-ended questions out of here, I might end up clicking on it here, copy, get a Word document out. Let's see, let's get a new one going here. Let's go. I'll pull it over for you. Here we go. And then I simply cut and paste that thing out of there. And look at, there's all the answers that I can analyze too. And again, this is a big research study, but I want to show you because again, in the industry, you may have done a pilot study this semester, but you'll have responses like this. So now I can just delete this right out of here. And now I'm looking to clean the data, get it organized, get these open-ended questions out of here, right? I'm going to look for numbers. I can see I've got some things to clean up, right? I've got some work to do. So that's going to take some time, and cleaning data typically does. Again, one of the things I have to do is make sure that every question is actually asked in one row, if that makes sense again. So I clean this up. If I see here, this says response row 2, I'm going to move every question down to this second row. And so I cut here and I move that down, and I do that because I want to get rid of this whole row. And the problem is if I haven't moved all the questions to be one row, I'll get to a question like this where it's response, but I have no idea what it means because I didn't move the question down. So again, I move every question down to make sure that it is represented on the second row, and then I get rid of that top row. Oh, all of these need to move down. Response, response, response. These all do. Hope that makes sense. Then again, when I get ready, I can hit delete. Now this is organized by, again, cleaning the data, get it all ready, and I could use this to go back into SPSS to have higher level analysis. So that's that functionality as shared. Now the PDF, when I look at that, I can download again. Let's see if it's going to do that a little faster. Whoops, I didn't need to download two, I guess. Still thinking. There we go. So again, you can see all the open-ended questions right there. It's certainly a lot easier than having it on Word. It's already put there. And then there's analysis here. I want to show you one other function. This was a 5-point scale question of very important to, unimportant or not very important. And it says and shows the total number of responses by area. What it doesn't do is any type of analysis if I wanted to compare this as a mean score on a 5-point scale. So one of the functions on SurveyMonkey that's incredibly helpful now that it didn't always do is when I have a question like this that by nature is going to only give me a frequency, SurveyMonkey will allow some higher level analysis. And I just clicked on Customize, and I want to go, first of all, it'll display it differently if I'd like it to be displayed differently. But the display options allow for some basic statistics. You can see that right here. And different analysis that I might use. So I'm going to use the basic statistics, and I'm going to click OK. So when I go to the bottom of it now, I should have, and I do right here, the same questions have a minimum, a maximum, a median, a mean, and a standard deviation. Standard deviation, again, is variance, how far away people were from each other. The bigger the number, the more variance. Lots of people said 1, lots of people said 5, right? Kind of idea. The smaller the standard deviation, the closer everybody is the same. So these are important figures for a couple reasons. One is I want to know, make sure there was no data entry error. Again, if they did this manually, I want to know it was only 1 through 5, so I should see that in my min and my max. I should also, the median is, right, the 50th percent, like half, at the half point of the people, out of 500 people, the 250 mark is the middle, right? And then the mean is the average rating of that group, and then standard deviation I've explained. So I may represent the data in this form, and I might consolidate things. Like I might put the important, very important people together. And I might say, let's say it's 28 and 37, so 50, 65, 66% of the people, right, indicated that easy accessibility was important or very important. Because that, to me, was a more important story than just representing those who said very important. But I may decide to create a table that does the mean score, right, of all of these responses in order of what's most important to least important. And I know most important was a lower number. So something like variety of activities to people were way more important than something like having a lot of people around, right? And that's a reliability check. You wouldn't expect people to say they didn't want to have, or they did want to have a lot of people around. So I may present this data of maybe just the top 10 things that were most important to people and then do it in order. So again, data can be shared in a lot of different formats and ways. My job is to look at it and understand for each question what and where the story is that would be helpful to answer my objective. And it's not going to be just to present it all just like this. It's going to be to organize it and prioritize it for everybody who's reading the information. So, for example, if I'm just talking about visitor behavior, I don't have to put this whole table in there. I might just say in one sentence that 76% of the respondents visited Grand Haven last year. And then I have an open-ended question that I'll say for those that didn't, right, of that 20, what did I just say it was, 24%? 24% of the people that didn't, of the respondents, why didn't they? Asked an open-ended question. I put those into categories, and there may have been the top 3 reasons. And you can bet one was time, right? Other obligations. And then a follow-up question to that section is, of those people, will they visit Grand Haven another time? They didn't get to this time, will they again? And 75% of the people said yes. Another 21% said they were uncertain. And I'd share that information together in just a couple sentences, and it would give them a lot of insight. So I don't want you to forget that basic statistic. Again, let me go back. Every question, it's under customize. You can change the chart type, and you could actually use this as an imagery, but it's typically not as complete of a storytelling as some of the other tools I put into Blackboard, right? But it certainly might be a better way to share a story. So display options, don't forget this basic statistic. That's going to give me both pieces of information, mean, median, right? And it'll also give me standard deviation, but I'll also get the answer in frequency form. So certainly one of the many great things about SurveyMonkey's advancement. So with that, we've gone through several of the steps before again. Filter, we talked about. Compare, we talked about, right, as common and interesting ways to compare data. Look at different questions, different ways, and tell and see the story. So your task is take your findings and tell us what they mean in an unbiased, right, reflection that addresses the objectives that you set forth to understand.